formed in a dream, kept in a thought, carried across oceans, spoken in whispers, passed down from elders, planted in gardens of okra, prayed for in sanctuary, resisted with fury, protected with faith, created with love, born into being, from root to bone. You are here.
This podcast talks about colonial, racial, and gender-based violence. Please listen at your own pace and capacity. And remember to do what you need to do to care for yourself if you feel activated by this content. Should you need resources, please check out our section on resources at decolonizingtherapy.com. Be well. Welcome, my good people. This is Dr. Jenn, and welcome from Root to Bone podcast with Dr. Jenn. Today, in our ground zero, our episode 1, you're going to get to know me a little bit. This episode is just going to be with yours truly. And the invitation is for me to sit in my discomfort, for me to sit with that which I often don't want to sit with, which is like being the center of attention. And I don't know if you can identify, but throughout my childhood, teenage years, and adulthood, folks would say to me, oh, you love being the center of attention, or you love being a ham, or you love, and the reality is it was never about loving it. It just, when I was passionate about things and when I am passionate about things and when I have a message, it needs to come out. And so for those of you that have always felt that you were bored by surface conversations, by small talk, by needing to have answers to like, what do you do? What's your work in the world? Then welcome. Because From Root to Bone is a podcast for people that are deeply parched, that are primed and ready to rehydrate mind, body, spirit, relationally, somatically, energetically. It is for people that are literally parched, poised, and primed to do some unlearning and to rehydrate ourselves from literally the root, our people, to bone, to body, to sinew, to blood, to organ, including this big organ we have in our head. And so this podcast is a place where I talk to some of my intellectual crushes, some of my elders, some fellow teachers, friends. I don't really do the whole colleague thing anymore. That is awfully Eurocentric. And hello, my colleague. And we're out here trying to divest from all things that tell us that we need to be in time and on time and that we need to do things a certain way. And so much of this podcast is an acknowledgement that at its core, decolonization, the taking back of what was once stolen, what was once taken, what was once ours to steward with land. And so part of Root to Bone is about looking at how land is us and we are land. I was recently on some ancestral land, and the first thing I felt was deep discomfort. Yeah, it was a sense of like, woof, I haven't been here in a while and I've never set foot on this particular land. And there was a sense of, I want to get to know you. And yet it was a trepidation. It felt like a meeting a long lost ancestor that I haven't met in many, many, many years. A family member that I'd been dying to meet, that I created this whole storyline about. And yet upon meeting them, I was at a loss for words. And then came some comfortability. And then came deep grief. And I think that some of that grief probably belonged to some of my ancestors and some of the grief belong to the land and the people calling themselves indigenous. And what the land communicated to me was that we're the original. We are the indigenous people. We, the land, is sentient, living, and breathing. And so, my work in the world, although I'm trained as a clinical psychologist, Western clinical psychologist for 25 years, my work in the world now, it's called decolonizing therapy. But the reality is what I do is help people decolonize themselves. Yeah. Because I don't believe it's possible to give back land or be in that process of land decolonization without having an internal, very deep ass fucking shift in perspective, right? Without having this other shift where we start to realize that, oh shit, not only am I being affected by said problem, but I'm part of the problem. And if we can't start owning and connecting to the fact that we are also a part of the issue and that we can also bring some space, solidarity, insight, and understanding to the issue, then we are going to get stuck in pontificating, intellectualizing, teaching to others, pushing outward, when part of what every single one of us needs to do, not just therapists, social workers, what all of us need to do is look at how we've harmed and how shame has come up and swallowed us whole, on how we have been attempting to separate ourselves from our grief, from our rage, and how that has led to an abundance of deep fucking shame. And when a people are stuck in a shame cycle and feel ashamed, well, then, then there's not really space for the rawness and the beauty and the messiness and the communality of healing. So once upon a time, not long ago, I was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, green as fuck, really, really looking forward to changing the world. Yeah. I was really clear that I was meant to be a therapist. Right. But that clarity only happened after being part of a peer education group that I happened to fall into college. And years later, I went on to coordinate for 13 years. Right. And it really was the beginning of decolonizing therapy, my work with my peer educators. So undergrad, I lived in Jersey City, New Jersey. I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey, between Jersey City and West New York. And I would say that my family, although we didn't identify ourselves as such, and I don't know if my mom or dad would identify themselves as such either, but we definitely were probably working poor. Money and scarcity and security and what we were going to eat or how we were going to get by over the next month was always a topic, was always an argument, and was always within earshot. And I was a bridge and tunnel kid, right? Like my parents were constantly, taking buses and trains, going to work into New York City, Manhattan, or Long Island City, or Queens, wherever they were working at the time. And I went to school in Jersey, in North Jersey, because let's get clear, we are very different than Central and Southern Jersey. Thank you very much. So, therapy wasn't something we talk about. Feelings wasn't something we talked about. And I grew up with a highly destabilizing, raging father. I grew up with people around me raging. I grew up internalizing my emotions and trying to push down my softness, trying to push down my ability to see with a capital S and know with a capital K. And everything about me deep inside was crying out for connection, for softness, for voice. I loved writing. I loved reading. I had a deep, rich world with my books, with my paper dolls, with my, with like making my little cousins like do tests and grade papers. And I was just like bossy Bosserton, super precocious. And so much of how I walked in the world was dictated by my environment in which I just needed to survive. And I'm not ready on this podcast to talk about some of the shit that I saw, some of the shit I did, some of the stuff I went through, though I think that there's episodes that'll be perfect for that in the near future. But allow me to say it was like knuck if you buck, right? Like I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and life was lifing for kids like me, right? Like we were inner city kids that were getting by any way we could. I had to stand in front of judges, we'll put it that way. So on one end, I was like a straight A student, other than my comportment, because I couldn't stop talking and I couldn't get out of my seat. I couldn't stop getting out of my seat. But on the other end, I was about that life, right? And I had cousins that were very much in that life and that later on went into prison and deeply, deeply struggled with addiction. So they were always kind of protecting me a little bit from it. And at the same time, I just loved having one whole leg in it. And there is something about me. So if a lot of folks know me as Dr. Jenn or the Rage Doctor, and that's a whole other episode for another time, but allow me to say that rage was part of my life, right? Feeling fear, feeling that stomach drop, someone say, yo, knowing that they're talking to you, knowing that if you turn around, shit is gonna go down. Like I just felt like that was part of my daily experience. And even though I'm not wearing black Reeboks with gummy soles anymore, or dark green Huaraches, thank you very much, or my cross color outfit, thank you. Allow me to say there are still moments where my stomach drops. But now when my stomach drops, it's when justice needs to be served, when someone's actions and their behaviors are not lining up, when someone's ancestors say to me, no, 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 that ain't it. Right. And so this work in me started through thinking I was going to teach, then joining this peer education group. Most of my peers that were like me, poorer than me, Black, brown, Arab, Filipino, working class, white, poor as fuck, right? We're all together sharing and talking about shit that happened to us. And that peer education group really was like a work study placement, but it became volunteer, and we were addicted because it's like someone knowing all about you and liking you just the same. And as I was saying, shame, I think, is such a fucking killer in our society. The level of loneliness that so many of us experience because we feel like we are alone in our tragedy, in our sadness, in our loss, in our intensity of rage, that if I allow myself to feel this, I'm going to pop off and snap. I might never be able to get back. How many of us have said that, heard that, felt that, internalized that, experienced that, right? And if you're in a body of culture, if you're a person of color, if you're Black, if you're Mexican, if you're Latino, if you're dark-skinned South Asian, if you're fucking Guyanese, if you're Jamaican, right? We can keep going on. If you're from Ghana, like there's an understanding that for you, the rules are fucking different. Yeah. And then you add other identities of queerness, being in a body that's in a lot of pain, or neurodivergent, neurospicy, which a whole other podcast, but is it neurodivergence? Am I living with ADHD? Or am I having a spiritual emergence and I be seeing and hearing shit, right? We're going to get to that in a second. So the reality is, going back to me for just a moment, before I share with you a little bit of something that I've read, Peer education saved my life. The group of people that I was sharing every Wednesday with allowed me to see myself in them. We didn't even need the coordinator half the time. The reality is we started to be able to hold space, whatever the definition of is holding space for one another and holding space for ourselves. And folks had been through violent offenses, sexual assault. Folks had lost family members. Folks had been displaced from their homeland, from their farms, from their parents, from their grandparents. Folks had tried to take their lives and unalive themselves multiple times and maybe still were in the process of harming their bodies as a way of staying on this earth. Folks were struggling with addiction. Folks were struggling with codependence, with being stalked. Like so many of us were coming in feeling quote unquote broken, messy, fucked up. And it was then when I realized that I could sit in these kind of groups and I could hold these kind of spaces for the rest of my life. And I guess that's what I kind of did. Right. And so when I went on and I started working at UMDNJ at the time in Newark, New Jersey, represent. And I worked on a partial care unit for adolescents, latency age adolescents that were violently traumatized and harmed. And then I knew that I wanted to do whatever we understand to be clinical work because I was working on a team with psychiatrists, with other therapists. I was not a therapist. Yes, I was a mental health professional with crisis staff who were from around the way. We were working hard together to get kids, to pull them out of gangs, to work with some of the main gang members in order to say, look, they're 12 years old, my G. What do we need to do to pull out da-da-da-da-da-da? And what can we get you in return? And how can we, right? How do we balance this? I learned to truly do conflict mediation without any fucking certificate. I learned to work with community and be in community. Because even if they were my community, half the times we didn't want to connect with folks that we saw as other. Like, I might be selling some drugs, but I'm not as bad as blank. Right? I'm not selling crizzles, right? Like I'm not selling heroin. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And there was this distinction of wanting to separate ourselves from community that we saw as extra bad and extra problematic from who we were. Yeah. And that was part of like what growing up was like for me. And I suppose helping on this other end that was kind of legal, but kind of dangerous. Cause like youth would come in like, get the F off me. You're fucking stupid. I'm like, okay, so-and-so, I'm going to give you another second to get it together and approach me properly. I know you might have had a bad day. Can we use our words? Can you color in the corner? Can you grab your favorite turtle? Can you this? Can you, right? Or sometimes they would come in, I love you. Please don't leave, and just the same person getting two separate ends. And I thought, by working with these youth, I'm also healing some aspect of my inner child and my inner teenager and myself. And this is a way of giving back to my community, hopefully with getting some skills. But what I started realizing, and this goes from like, then I moved to California, went to school, a doctoral program. Well, that's another day for another time. And was also working with adult sex offenders in prison and in outpatient. And working with people that were deeply traumatized within the prison industrial complex. And I was organizing, right? And I was meeting, Paiute, Navajo, Chicano, indigenous Salvi people, Black folks that were related to Huey P. Newton, right? Like hardcore learning what organizing and activism is. And I started unlearning some of what clinical psychology, Eurocentric Western psychology had impregnated me with. And that is master's tools. And I started realizing and acknowledging that there was more than just what I understood as the United States. And there was more than what I understood as just my racial identity or ethnic identity or gender identity. And it was also people asking me what I was willing to die for. And I realized really clearly that we couldn't separate systems of harm. We couldn't separate psychology, my beloved psychology that I adored so fucking much, from systems of oppression, because psychology and mental health were also, because psychology and mental health were also deeply, deeply harmful. How was I at 24, 25, 26 years old allowed to do assessments within a prison system and decide whether or not somebody was eligible for parole? No one had ever asked me about my understanding of why people were poor, why people committed crimes. No one ever asked me about my analysis of power and privilege, right? No one ever asked me whether or not I had family members that were locked up. Were they in jail? Were they upstate? Were they in prison? No one ever asked what my personal experiences were that could possibly cause prejudice to the assessments I was doing. And I never really asked the feedback of the human in front of me about whether or not they could handle being out, whether or not they felt they were ready. And believe it or not everybody says yes. Not everybody thinks that they're ready to be out in general pop, right? And no one ever asked me whether or not I had an abuse history, whether I was ever violently harmed, sexually, physically, emotionally, energetically. Was I neglected? Did I have deep loss? And was any of that impacting me or impeding me from being a clear, quote unquote, neutral channel in doing this work or this assessment with this other human being? And so I started doing trainings with the People's Institute of Survival and Beyond. And I started working with Anakbai in USA, in New Jersey, in New York, and Gabriella, and other organizations, which I cannot and will not name right now. And I started really deeply understanding that education, mental health, transportation, medical care, that all of it is deeply, deeply political, because it's about access, right? It's about everything being trauma fucking conscious and informed. And it's about who has clean running water, whose pronouns are being used or not, or consistently denied and minimized, right? And, around 10, 11 years old, I became so overwhelmed by hearing and seeing things that other people did not acknowledge that I would pray and wish it away. I was forced to go to CCD classes. I grew up pretty Catholic, although my mom, my abuelita and my mom were always doing hella witchy, very Santeria related things. But they were like, no, 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 we're Catholic. Even though they would go to a lady in Brooklyn to read their soup leaves and get readings and put metal scissors open under my bed and water with holy water and spray it on me if I was sick, as if I was speaking in tongue. Maybe I was, I don't know. But I always knew shit, right? I was always knowing shit. I always be knowing shit. And shit that other people shouldn't know. I had a teacher in kindergarten and I loved her. And I loved school because there was consistency and there was connection and there was containment to some level. And she saw me and she liked me to read and write and sing and dance. And I loved people that allowed me to be my unbridled child self, even though I don't think I could have identified that at the time. And she snapped at two of my friends, and one of my friends started crying. And as is Jen, I went off and was like, don't yell at them like that. And she was like, Jennifer, please sit back down. And I was like, you're only mad because your husband's cheating on you. Well, honey, apparently that was true. Her husband was cheating on her. And the thing is, that might have been what? So I was 6 years old. I was born in 78. So you do the math. There was no beepers. There was no social media. There was no telephone in the classroom. I was in kindergarten. There's no way I could have known that. Right. And so she sent me to the principal's office and I got in trouble and my mom got called in. It was this whole thing. And I felt bad and wrong for that. I felt deep shame. I felt like I wanted to hide forever. And I kept wishing it away. And I think that that's part of why I acted out so much in my teenage years, aside from the level of intensity that was happening at home and in my environment. But it snuck back up. And as I always tell with people, you can deal with shit on your own terms, even though it's hella hard, or you can wait until it deals with you. And it's, oh, baby, it's always going to deal with you. And I like to say that we have some agency if we start to get like a head up on it. But it started dealing with me. And I would be in sessions with people and one of their grandmothers is over their shoulder, like da 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 in their language. And I'm like, until I learn to work with it. And so that's the other piece, is that I realized that I wasn't the only one experiencing that, or knowing with a capital K, maybe through sense, through smell, through strong intuition. And then I started doing more and more research and working with my own healers, helpers, space holders, ancestral guides, asking questions of my aunties and my mom and my family, and realizing that I came from a very long line of also Kuna Indian indigenous healers and helpers and people that maybe they didn't identify as shamans themselves, but that is certainly the work that they did. And the realization that therapy itself, right, that psychology itself stems from healing modalities that are very, very akin to our cultures. Yeah. And so that is part of my work, and that is part of how decolonizing therapy came along, because it isn't about trying to change and make the kind of therapy better. It isn't a checkbox. It's much more about a shift in perspective for the person, right? Undoing who we thought we fucking were to become the highest iteration, the most shadowy iteration, the messiest and most honest, pure conduit iteration of who the fuck we are. And so I'm highly spiritual. It's my biggest relationship is with my ancestors and other ways of knowing. And at the same time, I will rap heavy 90s hip hop. From word to word, from beginning to end, and I'm about it, right? Like, so I love the paradox, and I think that is what this podcast is and who it's for. It's for folks who are so tired of having to fit one end or another, to pick one side or another, to I'm going to behave like a therapist. I'm going to be hella neutral, or I'm going to behave. This is what an engineer behaves like, or this is what a this behaves like, or this is what a teacher should act like. And it's like, no, if perhaps I am more fully myself and I'm still fucking great at what I do, maybe, just maybe, it gives you the confidence, and the people and the communities that I'm serving the confidence to be even more them fucking selves. Right. And that's all I hope to do in this world, is allow us to have our own personal revolutions. I am a survivor. I am a multidisciplinary care worker and strategist and survivor of a whole lot of things, and a healing practitioner. And all of that allows me to be who the fuck I am. And so today, I bring two offerings as we open up and ceremoniously open up from root to bone. Every podcast session, I'm going to invite myself and our guest to bring forth an offering to our virtual altar. Yeah. Because from root to bone is from the bottom to the top, from the inside to the out, from east to west, from north to south, from above to below. Yeah. From bone and sinew to land and earth, right? To that which lies beneath the earth, right? To that which grows from the earth, to that which crumbles and goes back into the earth to be recycled. And so the hope is that every single one of our guests and every single one of our podcasts makes you just a little bit uncomfortable, teaches you and helps you unlearn just a little bit more. Each of these people I have either worked with, learned from, have been elders, have been fucking friends, have been people that I've admired and been like, oh my gosh, you're so fucking badass, and are the true definition, even in all of their imperfections, right? Because not everybody coming onto this podcast do we fully align on every issue in our lives, or politically, or ancestrally, or how we connect, or what we receive, or what we believe. However, each of these people are examples of what it looks like to live in your fucking truth and to bring forth what comes natural to you, even when the world around you is like, nah, we don't need another blank, or nah, just keep that to yourself, or nah, real blank, don't do blank, right? These people are examples of folks that are doing the fucking thing, right? That are contributing to our future collective society and are offering shifts in perspective, whether in medicine, whether in meditation, whether in rage work, whether it's in grief, whether it is in understanding Blackness and how deeply anti-Blackness is embedded in this world, whether it's in understanding revolution, socialism, stand-up comedy, grief. I said grief, but I said it again on purpose. And so every single episode and every single season is going to bring a new flavor, going to bring a new edge. And my hope is that you feel heartened by the stories, that you feel heartened and expanded by the fucking realness, by the intensity of our conversations, by the love in our conversations, and by the natural brilliance that each person brings forth, right? Because we don't need a bunch of minions. What we need is a bunch of mad ass motherfuckers that, you know, are going to be in their own ways frontline responders in the new world. And that's what From Root to Bone is about. And so I bring forth, when we talk about the root, I bring forth this beautiful citron that my spirit brother Peter gifted me. And citron, as Tribble and I were talking about earlier, brings about clarity, self-expression, prosperity, abundance. It comes from the solar plexus, reminding me to speak from my fucking truth, from my gut, right? From my heart, right under there, right? And out. And I just think this citrine is just absolutely just, woo! They're beautiful. And so I place that on our Root to Bone altar, and we'll have the citrine on our From Root to Bone altar throughout. And when it comes to bone, that was a really hard one. But for me, at the same time, it feels simple and clear and silly and just like all of it all at once. So what I would like to lay down is my beautiful baby here, Pia. This is Pia. She is an amazing snake plant, and she is a she told me, when she was a baby. And she's extremely nurturing and loving and wanted to be here. I had her somewhere else in my space, and she's like, nah, let me support you and let me support this work. Pia is massive and loving and an extension, and she is ancestral technology. I believe that plants are ancestral technology, crystals of the earth harvested in a way that doesn't harm others and is not mined, and killing others is ancestral technology. And from root to bone, may we pop out, from root to bone, may we remember how our generational experiences, our pain, our wisdom, our trauma shows up in us, shows up in the work we do, and is a beautiful path towards undoing some of our generational pain and moving forward into generational fucking joy. On each of our podcast episodes, I'll be reading a piece that our guests have written that have opened me, expanded me, aroused me, like emotionally, mentally, just been like such a fucking turn on, like fucking yes, they get it, that energy. And so I'm being directed to read a little something to you. And what feels right. So I've channeled/wrote this book called Decolonizing Therapy, Oppression, Historical Trauma, and Politicizing Your Practice. And although many people might say that this book is geared towards therapists, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, educators, care workers, coaches, yes, but I think it's for everybody. And I think there's parts here for everyone, like the chapter on rage and grief, sacred rage and suffocated grief, like the chapters around mutual aid and peer support. But part of being in publishing as well is also knowing when to push back. And I fought hard for this cover and the rooted energy of the cover and of the heart in the tree. But I also fought hard to have an acknowledgement section as long as I wanted. I'm not going to read that whole thing, but I am going to read the beginning of the acknowledgement section because I feel it's a way of doing a land, labor, ancestral acknowledgement and space grounding. If you're reading along, feel free to do so. It is prior to chapter 1 and it's part of the acknowledgement section. So it starts. Acknowledging and loving y'all. I wrote and read voraciously as a child. It was my world. My grandfather, Benigno Mark, would sit me next to him. The bus would be careening down Flatbush Avenue, and he would quiz me on capitals of countries around the globe, on what I was reading, all the while giving me lectures on the value of respect. He would tell me to respect myself, my parents, and my great-great-great-grandparents, enough to speak the truth and speak it with clarity. That truth-telling was indeed love, and one that the world deeply needed from a person such as me. I know that this book is an act of love, because love is, after all, really fucking rebellious. I give a deep, cheerful gratitude to my ancestors, who are the shoulders and spirits I do this work for and with. Benigno Mark, Lucia Mark Jimenez, Inocencia Yarza, Julia Telesi, Alicia Tuñón, James Mullen Sr., and so many others whose faces and spirits I feel, but whose names go unspoken. I honor you. To the besties I had to grieve way too early, Raynell White and Tanja Martinez, I do this for you. To the lands that cradled me and sustained me while writing this book, especially the lands stewarded by the Lenni Lenape peoples, I remember those whose labor was exhausted and exploited across these lands, those who were removed from their families, tongues, cuisines. I honor you. To the constellation of energies that are decolonizing therapy, I honor you and thank you. To the spirits and ancestors of the East, to the morning dew, to the essence of spring, the feeling of falling in love, to the condor, to the butterfly, to the morning sunrise, to the eagle and to the wind, to Baba Obatala and Oya, I welcome you. To the spirits and ancestors of the South, to the noontime scorching sun, to the sacred fire, to that which we release and burn away, to the releasing of illusions and fear of loss, to the deepest desert scorpion, to the snake, to the energy of resurrection, and the phoenix, to Shango, I welcome you. To the spirits and ancestors of the West, to Mama Wata, to the luminescence of the surrender and the release, the letting go of that which we never had fucking control over. May we honor the whale, the dolphin, the octopus, and shark spirits, the deep depths, the deep dark secrets, and the abundance at the bottom of the ocean held under the love of Olokun. to Yemaya, the mother of the ocean, and the siren song, to Oshun, mother of the rivers, I welcome you. To the spirits and ancestors of the north, to the cold white winter earth, to the polar bear and the white barn owl, to the desert wolf, to that which must die and leave, to that which we must walk alone and with our ancestors, I welcome you. I welcome you, sacred ones, medicine ones, you whose bones lie and held beneath the earth. To the rooted nations, to that which holds and sustains, I welcome you. To those from above, to the ascended masters, to the high master teachers and the galactic wisdom keepers, to the bodhisattvas, to the archangels and the celestial families, I welcome you. To Jaguar, I bow to you. To the drum and the conga, to the divine masculine and feminine and all in between, to consciousness, to all divine feminine energies that have been outcasted and minimized, to my queer four people, to all who have ever felt unloved, unseen, too much, and yet not fucking enough, to all who have had to hide their shine, their knowingness. I see you. Respect, love, libations, and a deep bow for those that paved the paths, built the foundations, spoke with their voice shaking, and for all of those blood and non-blood relatives who took a chance and spoke out. To every elder, ancestor, activist, teacher, and liberator that spoke of the emotional impacts of colonization, no matter the language, no matter the pentameter, or whether or not the words were acknowledged by academia or community organizers, I fucking honor you. From Root to Bone is a podcast from Decolonizing Therapy. It is hosted by me, Dr. Jenn. Our producer is Tribble at Ash Tribble Incorporated. Original music by Laura Burke and cover art by Madre Shell. Don't forget to find us on Instagram at Decolonizing Therapy and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Decolonizing Therapy, for the full video version of each episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your people and leave us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps people find us. For more info about Decolonizing Therapy, visit our website, www.decolonizingtherapy.com. Be well.